This is the 222B from Cowan Simulation. The Bell 222B is a twin-turbine engine light helicopter which had its first flight in 1982. However, if you watched TV in the 80s, you probably know it by a different name. That's right, we got Airwolf, or at least the helicopter Airwolf was based on. Sure, it's not supersonic and packed with funky high-tech gadgets, but that doesn't make me love it any less. Today's test flight will be starting from Nellis Air Force Base, just north of Las Vegas. The 222B comes with 39 liveries, and I'm sure they're all up to the usual standard we'd expect from Cowansim. But we really only need one, don't we? You don't get the huge range of customization options that are normally included with Cowansim's other helicopters. However, all the doors open and close, and in the back we'll find our two favourite passengers from the H125 and 500E. The cabin area of the 22B is quite spacious and has some really nice quality textures. But in terms of customization, we're pretty much limited to removing the cockpit doors, passengers and co-pilot. The 222B has quite an unusual collective. It's not the handbrake style you see in most helicopters, but it works in the same manner. It has two separate twist grip throttles, one for each engine. The switches along the bottom are currently inoperative, but with any luck may become available in a future update. The landing lights, however, do work. The start assist is to help get the engines going in cold conditions below minus 26 degrees C, that's minus 15 degrees Fahrenheit for those of you that don't speak centigrade. There's also a searchlight position switch and an idle stop release, which we'll talk about when we shut down at the end. On the overhead panel, we have our battery, generators and inverter switches, as well as fuel valves and pumps. You've also got more light switches, pitot heater and wiper control. Above that lot are your breakers. Some of these work and pop in and out and some don't, but you don't really need to do anything with them. Before we start this helicopter, I just want to take a moment to point out just how broad the rotor blades in this helicopter are. It's around a third of the width of the main fuselage. Those are some pretty big rotor blades. There is a full checklist supplied in the folder for the 222B, which you can look through in detail if you're interested, but this procedure should get you up and flying. The first thing we need to do is turn on the main battery switch. There are two fuel valve and fuel pump switches, one for each engine. The switches on the left are for engine 1 and the switches on the right are for engine 2. Let's start with engine 1, open the fuel valve and turn on the pump. Press the engine 1 starter button and watch as the RPM for engine 1 starts to climb. When it passes 12%, indicated by the little white marker, you can roll the left twist throttle until it clicks. The start warning light and two engine out lights should be lit. When the start light and left engine out light go out, you can start on engine 2. With both engines up and running, you can turn off the fuel pumps and turn on the generators. Be careful not to turn off the fuel valves though, or you'll be back at square one. Gently roll in the throttles. Try to avoid letting the engine oil pressure go beyond the green zone. Once the rotor RPM enters the green zone, the governor will engage and you can roll the throttles to max. And as safety is always our top concern, let's turn on the seatbelt and no smoking signs for our passengers. I suspect they're going to need it. And we're ready to fly. Now the 222B has a proper landing gear with wheels, so you can ground taxi it. It's a little awkward to get started though. Start by making sure your parking brake is released, and then raise the collective a little bit, but not so much that you start to lift off. Once you're light on your wheels, pitch forward gently and you should start to roll. Don't be too aggressive with it though, or you could tip the helicopter over. Once you're rolling, you can steer with the pedals. Control your speed by pitching forwards or backwards, and use the toe brakes if you can't slow down fast enough with pitch alone. Have a little drive round until you get used to it. When you're ready to take off, apply a small amount of left pedal and move the cyclic a little half left, then gently raise the collective. You may wish to use toe brakes to stop you rolling before you leave the ground. Once you're underway, you can raise the landing gear. If you're below 60 knots, the master warning light may go off, just to let you know the gear is up, just in case you're thinking of landing again. If this happens, you can cancel it with the master warning button, or just accelerate past 60 knots, at which point it should stop by itself. One of the things you need to be able to accept about flying this helicopter is that it's impossible to do so without singing the Airwolf theme tune on your head. However, once you manage to make peace with that particular little earworm, the handling of the helicopter itself is very nice. It's not nearly as twitchy as some of the past offerings from Cowan Sim, and it can go pretty fast, by helicopter standards anyway. If you exceed the top speed, the ride does get a little bit more interesting, but settles down again once you slow down. Talking of things getting a bit more interesting, let's try some aerobatics. This is after all a top secret high-tech super helicopter. First up, barrel roll. Not bad, if a little wobbly on the dismount. Let's go for a loop-the-loop. Let's see what the passengers think. Well, they seem completely unfazed, but at least they're not throwing up. Now let's see how the 222B handles engine failures. We'll start by shutting the fuel valve to engine 2. The engine out light has come on and the master caution warning is going off. We can cancel that by pressing the button because, well, it's kind of annoying. The loss of one engine isn't a big deal. Once we ease off the collective and level out, the helicopter will stabilise and fly quite happily with one engine, albeit at a reduced speed. However, it's perfectly capable of returning to base and making a safe landing. The chance of both engines failing is slim but not impossible, so let's shut off the fuel valve for engine 1 and see if we can auto-rotate this thing safely to the ground. Make sure your gear is down. We need to pitch forward to keep the rotors turning and maintain rotor RPM, so we still have some lift available when we're ready to touch down. Once we're close to the ground, we can start to level off and bleed off a bit of airspeed. An advantage of having a landing gear with wheels is that we don't need to come to a stop before we touch down. We can do a rolling landing and apply the brakes once we're on the ground. And there you have it, we've landed undamaged and can restart and carry on. You might want to use a rolling landing on runway too, if you're heavily loaded or having engine problems. This is done much like you would with a light GA plane. Just make sure your airspeed is below 60 knots or your landing gear will not deploy. Once on the ground, you can roll to a stop or carry on to taxi to parking. After a busy day of testing out the 222B, let's take our passengers for a little night tour of Vegas and drop them off at their hotel. The shutdown procedure is essentially the opposite of a startup. Roll your throttles back as far as they'll go, then use the idle stop release switch so you can roll them the rest of the way to off. The stop release has a 5-second timer for you to roll down the throttles before it re-engages, so you need to move quickly. Close the fuel valves. Cancel the master warning when it starts to get annoying. And make sure you've engaged the parking brake. You should also switch off your generators. You can make the rotor slow down quicker by raising the collective, just don't do it too soon as you don't want to lift off again. So ease it up and be ready to put it back down if the helicopter starts to lift. Once you feel the rotor going slow enough, you can put on the rotor brake. With the engine stopped, we can turn off any lights and shut off the battery. I really like this helicopter. Cowansim have given us some great helicopters, but I think this one might be my favourite, and not just because it's Airwolf. It's really nice to fly and performs brilliantly. The only potential criticism is the lack of visibility downwards, as you only have a tiny window by your feet. However, if you adjust the camera height a little, you can almost see straight down the nose, and it's not too difficult to judge landing spots in VR. Although that does bring me to another issue. The VR zoom doesn't seem to work. It's not critical, but it's a very useful feature to have. So it'd be nice if that was in a future update. But these are just minor blemishes on an otherwise gorgeous gem of an aircraft. Hope you enjoy flying this aircraft as much as I do, and if you enjoyed this video, please do the like and subscribe thing. Until next time, fly safe.